The CX Pod is brought to you by Netigate. Netigate helps you put your customers at the center of your business. Check them out at netigate.net.
Welcome to the CX Pod, where we aim to expand people's perception of customer experience management. We know that customer experience goes hand in hand with employee experience, and we believe that a broader and more holistic view might even replace terms like CX and EX with people experience or human experience.
Hello and welcome to the CX Pod. Hey Joanna, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you, Merete. I'm actually, to be honest, I'm really buzzing still from last week's experience, which was, of course, when this episode comes out, it won't be last week, but I was at the International Customer Experience Awards and I met so many great people. I was inspired by so many fantastic companies out there that are winning awards across the world for the work that they're doing with customer experience. And of course, I also got to spend the evening sitting together with Bruce Temkin, dancing at the table to the award ceremonies. And yeah, it was absolutely fantastic.
I mean, Bruce Temkin and dancing all in one night. That must be heaven for you. So for those of you listening out there who doesn't know Joanna that well or didn't listen to our first episode, where we spoke Norwegian even, you told us about your passion for dancing. So that's quite interesting. I wonder what it looked like when you and Bruce Temkin danced.
Yeah, well, we were sitting, but we were dancing. Actually, Bruce Temkin, he said to me, we had a really good conversation about dance, and he's given me a challenge that he thinks that I need to make a talk, a keynote, where I resemble dancing to the work that we do when we are orchestrating fantastic customer experience.
I love that.
I'm going to take that challenge.
You should. And I don't know if you guys, and hello, Helge, we'll get to you in a moment, but I'll just sort of acknowledge that you're here. If you guys, I mean, I know Ellen DeGeneres has been, she's had a lot of heat in the media, the last couple of years because bad work culture, which we don't like here at the CX Pod. But anyhow, before all of that happened, I was, and I have to admit that, occasionally I'm still a fan. But she did a show back in her early days where she illustrated her coming out story by dancing it.
Okay.
So I'm just going to leave it like that as a cliffhanger, and you probably find it on Netflix. Yeah, it's one of her first sort of solo stand-up shows where she illustrates how it felt coming out of the closet as gay, but interpreted in dance. So yeah, check it out. And then in a few weeks' time, you can also see Joanna exemplify customer experience. By dancing. Are you going to be my partner, Merete? Sure. I mean, I have rhythm, but I don't really know how to move. So this is a cyclist body, not a dancing body.
I think this can make for a really great narrative to compare the way that we actually work with customer experience.
Yeah, we're very different. You're the flexible one on this. So anyhow, Helge, hello. How are your dancing skills?
Not good at all. Especially not compared to my own wife. I'm terrible. I'm awful.
Oh, I'm sure that's not true. If we ask your wife, I'm sure she would say he's okay.
Oh, she would say it doesn't matter, but you are.
She's sweet. I already feel like I like her.
Yeah. You've got so many other qualities.
Yeah. So anyway, Helge, you are here today because you have been invited, first of all.
Thank you.
A little bird whispered in our ear that you have a thing or two to say about customer experience, which we like to talk about here at the CX Pod. And also, we have some common friends. So Janneke, who is leading up the Customer C network, we both are participating there. And also, I know you and Joanna have talked. So, I mean, there's a small world out there of CX enthusiasts. So a warm felt welcome to the CX Pod. And sorry to startle you with, starting this episode with dancing and chaotic. It's one of those days, but I think
it's all about you.
It's all about you. So why don't you just start by telling us who are you? Who is Helge privately, professionally, and not at least, how do you feel about being here today?
I'm very happy about being here today. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm Helge Tennu. I'm Norwegian. So I live on Nesodden, outside of Oslo. I've been yes, the normal story with the kid and the station wagon and the dog and the computers and Netflix in every room and whatever. But my professional journey started back in 2000-ish, I think a little bit after 2000. I was a graphic designer, I remember, and then we couldn't get paid. Like, it was hard to get paid to do graphic design for the internet. And what we found out that we could sell instead, or in addition, was a customer strategy framework. Or back then it was called like wireframes and information architecture. And these were quite new, but this was something that clients really wanted to pay for. So I started developing kind of strategy connected to those online experiences, and then doing some work as a creative lead, a strategy lead in some agencies here in Oslo. Eventually, and this is a little bit of a story, but I think it's a good one. And so 2010, there's a Swedish school called Hyper Island, and they do this master class for people, now for companies who want to they want to learn about the internet. And it's like 3 crazy days of people holding hands, and it feels like a cult in there. On the first day, they decide that we are going to be all about change. I don't know if you remember this. Back in 2010, it was change. And I was doing the session on the last day, and I just asked them, like, what is changing? And nobody could answer that question. It was just a lot of like top of mind words that didn't mean anything. So I thought that's a good opportunity. I'm going to try to be the person who figures out what the change actually is, able to articulate it in a way that organizations could do something about it. And everything I looked at, didn't matter if it was technology or business or kind of strategy or operations, it always came back to the customer. I always ended up with this notion of either it's like a change in the human demand patterns. I think there's Susanna Zuboff talks about. And so I started that kind of like reconnected with the customer even more. I was a business designer for 5 years, working both in Norway and with international clients. And then in 2018, I joined a pharmaceutical company, eventually as a CX lead or strategy lead for customer experience in the global team at the company is called MSD here in Europe, and then Merck in the US and Canada.
Yeah. What an amazing journey, Helge.
Thank you.
It really reminds me of one of the panel discussions we were actually having at the awards last week, where we talked about the past, the present, and the future, because your journey is it sort of also highlights the past of where we have been with customer experience towards where we are now. Of course, it started a lot with design and UX and siloed ways of looking at customer experience, but we've moved definitely into the future where we're starting to work across many divisions. So yeah, really.
Are we though?
Yeah,
no,
we are, but yeah. Sorry, Helge, you go.
We met Merete last week, and there was a part of our conversation was about, are we bouncing back, and kind of, is that not a good thing? Because it started, like, I didn't start with CX, I started with information architecture and wireframes, but it was very operational. It was like where do you shove, like, we put the customer on our PowerPoint slide as a leadership, but who gets to do the work? And it just travels down the organization to the bottom layers, and then they have almost nothing to play with, but they're asked to show up with an amazing plan. And then I remember, like, you had CD on, or Kim, you talked about this story, or we talked about this story in the CX community. And that was 2009, and they were able to lift that CX customer experience up to kind of a leadership level. It's a very good timeline. And then since 2009, I'm of the same impression. I think that it's dropping back down again to an operational level. Now, it can be both places. Like in the pharmaceutical company I worked in, we did put it at the top, but there's a force kind of continuously pushing it downwards to the operations, and doesn't do as good work when it's down there.
And I think one of the parts that I think is, and it's so difficult as well, right? So first of all, it's understanding the difference between customer experience and all the other customer X, success, service, CRM, whatever it is. But then there's also, I think what Gjensidige managed to do, so we were listening to Helge, the former group CEO of Gjensidige, talking about their journey. So I think they managed to lift it up. And I asked them the question, how did you sort of convince the CFOs, right? How did you do that? And he said, well, it was such bad times. So we had to invest in something, and they chose to invest in the customers. But they wouldn't have sort of been able to do that if it hadn't been for the bad times. So actually bad times was good for customer experience. and I made a note of that because I think that's true when you look at today's society as well. I think, the companies who truly care about the customers will make magnificent things for their customers in bad times. But then when they experience good times, the focus shifts to be more sort of about commercial. And then it's also the discussion, I think we've had it a few times in the pod as well, that you can have it on the top or the bottom, but it's never going to go all the way through. It's somehow we lack the part in the middle where the operationalization of it is working as a machinery. So here we are. It's like this, time it goes back in the pendant that goes back and forth, and we're never quite. It's never going to stop there. It's just going to, yeah.
Yeah. So
Are you trying to get us back on track now, Joanna?
No, I was just thinking as well that we've got such. I think the skill sets. A lot of the skill sets are there already because we are great at working operationally, actually, with customer experience. The problem is very often we don't actually have the high level strategic direction that is aligning the operational activities that are actually taking place throughout the organization. But I also had one other reflection because you mentioned that about good times and bad times, and me and Helge were just talking about this before we started the podcast, was that at the awards,
I was late.
Yeah, because you were late. But at the award ceremony, there was a really high percentage of submissions from the Middle East. And this is particularly interesting because amongst other things, Saudi Arabia actually have it as part of their overall region, right from the top governmental or state level, that customer experience is actually a strategic direction for all the companies. So you've got companies and state-run activities are all spitting money into customer experience now. And now they're not doing it because they're in bad times. They're doing it probably, and now I'm putting probably, but they're doing it probably because they know that it's really great renommee to create great customer experiences. So this is a really clever strategical decision, one that I would really love to see rolled out in many other countries.
But I also I think I was judging the case of the best citizen experience, right? And we had the Majid Al Futtaim. It's a collaboration between real estate developers and the public and the university. And what they managed to do, and it leaves you with such a high-end feeling, but it's for the public, right? So it's about treating every citizen. I mean, this is my interpretation of it. This wasn't part of their presentation, but it's like I felt that they wanted to treat every citizen as if they were a superstar or a rock star or a queen or a king by providing them with experiences that normally may not be available. And they just filled a street that wasn't used for anything because it was just behind a building site. They filled it up with artwork, from futuristic artwork from the students, and it was AI generated, and it was just basically what would Abu Dhabi look like in the future. So, and also the same with the other category that I was judging was the best BPO partnership, which was the Miral Destinations, and some of the ventures that they have, and I think they even won.
Absolutely.
They won on stage.
They did. Yeah, twice or three times even. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way it's just so they're pushing money into it, but they get return on that investment.
Yes.
Also because they see the cost of inaction that we've talked so much about. It's luxury, like it's like only the rich people understand the value of customer experience, which it shouldn't make sense, but that's the way it seems. Like if you go to a luxury hotel, they won't save no expense. Isn't that what he says, the guy in Annie, the musical? Spare no expense, he says when they send her out. So it's just like either you hold your money tight and you talk about ROI, but then you reach a certain level and then you just go pouring money into it because you're so confident it's going to come back, and it does.
Yeah.
So it's...
Oh, sorry. No.
We're stealing the show here. Sorry, Helge.
I need to jump in.
Yeah.
If I go back to this 2010 experience, and this woman called Shoshana Zuboff, like one of the most brilliant people that I've kind of ever kind of read it. And she calls it the premium puzzle. And she says the reason you get these changes and changes in technology and changes in business isn't because business suddenly changes or technology suddenly creates something. It's because of a change in customer demand patterns. And this is very often driven by the premium puzzle, which means that normal people get what rich people used to have. So she uses this example of the car, right? The car back in the beginning of the 1900s, something only rich people had. And then the Mr. Ford, and then eventually other manufacturers, they managed to produce a car to a much lower cost, and suddenly volumes of markets open up. And that's mass production. Now, then she goes on and into the 2010s, and she says, what is it that people with capital have that other people don't? And she says they have individualization and identity. And if you look at, this is back in 2010, if you looked at the 5 most valuable companies on the US stock exchange, it was Microsoft, Google, Amazon, not Netflix, but all of them. If you looked at all of them, every one of them individualized the experiences for their customers. And then I remember listening to Jeff Jarvis at the conference in Amsterdam, and he said, if I go to any big newspaper in your country, they will not be able to tell me anything about your customers. They don't know what their name is. They don't know where they live. They don't know when they get up in the morning. They don't know the name of their dog. The other ones they do. So that's why they're able to individualize. So I think you are completely right. There's something about the premium puzzle, and then I still believe 10 years later that it's about figuring out individualization and identity. I just want to add one more thing, because she has this wonderful quote.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
About iTunes. And she says her son explained to her what iTunes was to him. And he said, they built a boat for me to put my life on. Then they gave me a crew and made me the captain and told me I can sail wherever I want.
Wow.
Amazing.
Wow.
Goosebump
That's
factor.
so beautiful.
Right?
Yeah, that was, yeah.
And so if you then go into okay, so I worked 5 years in the pharmaceutical industry. It's not conservative, but it's not a progressive industry when it comes to CX. But how do you make that boat? How do you set up the and the data we use, this has been my biggest frustration, we're using the wrong data. Like, we're using data about channels or data about products as proxies for human beings. We're growing into this idea that if I can optimize my channel, my customers.
Call it, because I read your article. It wasn't fat data, but it was, what was the name?
Thick data.
Thick data, yeah.
So I came across, I usually go back into my library of books, but there's this book called Sense Making by Mads Björk. Really, really good book. That's when I got introduced to it. I think it's from 2015 or 16. But if you look, like in anthropology, it's called thick perspectives or something, applied anthropology. So it is a term that's been kind of wandering around for the last 8 or 10 years, but it still hasn't, like, the data people or the data culture or data scientists, they haven't kind of gotten into it yet. So for me, if I look at the future of CX, I think that we need to kind of, the data, since the data is going to be so important to the future of CX, we have to fix data. Like, CXers really need to dive in and make sure we have the right data fed into
and make
these
sure we use it
algorithms.
right. So trying to track us back to the question set, which isn't that big of a deal, but still somehow there are quite a few good questions in there, we like to believe. So and just your field of expertise, you've talked a little bit about it, but like currently today, what would you say it is?
I have no idea.
Apart from having all those books that you must have read.
I only read half of them. So this is because I've been wandering across the spectrum of where you kind of put the customer. So on my LinkedIn and on my website, I have this thing. It's this quote that says, the most underutilized resource in any organization is its customers. And I found myself that I work best in the kind of strategic part of the customer. trying to help organizations either put customer into their marketing strategy or their business strategy. But then the last year I was working in the pharmaceutical company, we started putting the customer into the operations, like not as a customer journey, but into the transformations, maybe is a better question, because 88% of transformations are failing. And why are they failing? Well, because they're technology projects and nobody wants. Customers aren't asking for them, and employees certainly are not asking for them, because we didn't create the demand. So how do you create the demand for the transformation? Well, that's through the human lens. It's a market of ideas. Like, you just have to win. And so if you ask me where I specialize in, it's kind of easier to say customer experience strategy, or business design is also a kind of a topic that I tend to use, or a term I tend to use, but I also find these labels boxy.
Yeah. And talking about boxy labels, that is our next question, because our question is, how do you define customer in your own words? Yes. How would you define customer experience, Helge?
Okay, cool. So yes, I did work a lot on this, also inside the pharmaceutical company. So because what we were seeing is that what the company, let me give you one example. So at one time, there's a strategy inside this organization that says to drive innovation through digital and data. To me, this is pure insanity, because that is just fund all the technology you can. Direction doesn't matter. So you get like people going in every direction. And then when you come to the customer, they feel, oh, that's just charity. Like, why? They don't see that. They don't see the value in it. So we said, well, we believe that you create value for the business by giving value to the customer. Now, this value to the customer changes a behavior in the customer. That is the thing that unlocks value back to the business. So delivering value to the customer, driving value to the business. And then we created this Venn diagram where we said, like, customer wants a lot of stuff, that's charity. Fine, don't do it. Business wants a lot of stuff that customers don't want. Don't do that. Figure out where those circles overlap. That's customer value that drives business value. And so that's the kind of the simplicity of where I ended up. I do get that that's a less common definition, but that's kind of what we kind of started kind of influencing the organization to do.
Yeah, I think it's a great definition. And I think because from a consultant or a customer experience leader, as you were yourself within an organization, I think this is the hugest stumbling block everybody is, how do I explain customer experience and why it's an area we should be focusing on? So actually bringing it down to explaining it, it's all about creating value.
Yeah.
But I also think that's only part of it, right? Because you can create that value, and we've seen loads of examples. I'm currently looking for a new car because my leasing is about to end in a few months, so I've started early, and I've been looking at Tesla, right? So Tesla's created humongous amounts of value with their new cars, the way you drive, the way they work, the way everything. The product itself is great. It's adding a lot of value. And it has changed the way consumers drive. So basically, it has provided value back to the company. Now, their customer experience, when you hear about service experiences with Tesla, is shite, So, but just to make a great example, and I see you laughing, which is fine, but I was just talking to my neighbor, and he said, yeah, but have you heard how bad they are at service? And then, the X has the doors that fly open, and then that's mechanisms and stuff that gets worn out. And then if you buy a used car, then it's gonna cost you a lot to fix. And then when you call the customer support, they won't help you. So yes, they have created the customer value, but they haven't really provided a good customer experience until they fixed all the surrounding processes as well.
Yeah.
In my experience, that's the total package is the customer experience. But I think it's a good starting point. Because that's when you can start making money fast by focusing on the customer, is by creating value. But then you have to fix the overlying and underlying processes.
No, but we use that overlying and underlying to actually drive the changes throughout the organization. So I can get a little bit back to that. But I also have a Tesla story. My family, we drove from Oslo to southern Spain to go on holiday. So that's a 4-hour day trip, I think.
What car did you have?
Supersonic.
I get in my car in Oslo, and I put the name of the Spanish town I'm going to into the display, and whoop, I got my whole journey and all the charging stations. And then every time I know exactly how to drive and where to drive. Not how to drive, I'm a terrible driver, but every time I get to a charging station, I just park the car and just put the hose in. And then you compare that to how this is like 3 or 4 years ago, and how difficult it was to do all these things if you didn't have a Tesla. And in order to do that, in order to be able to give me that thing that so I can focus on the family and on the driving, like they had to figure out how do we do the costs, how do we buy all the lots in all these countries, how do we do all the taxes in all the countries, how do we make sure that the car knows or the host knows which car is doing it, how do you know that the payment system is in place. I think I used this as an example, and I mapped out maybe 12 different parts of a massive organization that had to work together to make this happen. And to me as a customer, it's absolutely seamless. But then again, I also needed to service the car. And I found that it's very much about the people working in these service. So go to the one on Skøyen is the best.
Noted. I haven't
Good shout
decided
out
yet. Yeah, we will try to tag them somehow in the show notes.
Yeah.
And also,
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I wanted to go back to that, like how we use that Venn diagram to navigate the organization, just because I thought that was kind of an important link. So if you commit to that, if the organization commits to that and says, if we are able to identify which needs that the customer has, and if we deliver to those needs, there's going to be a change in behavior on the customer that's going to drive value to the business. Figure out those needs. And so you map out those needs, and then you make sure you calculate, you can make that causal relationship between the needs and the business value. And then you say, okay, so I'm going to measure my needs now, and I'm going to hold every part of the company accountable, not to an NPS, which is an arbitrary number, but to the needs measurement. And so suddenly everything, like we had modular content, we had omni-channel capabilities, you have data streams and frameworks, and say all of these have to be measured towards one or several of the needs that the organization has asked. This is how we will show up and differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. Now suddenly you can actually use that super simple Venn diagram to start kind of pushing the organization, incentivizing the organization towards creating the same type of experience and a good experience for your customer.
So Helge, I have to ask, and I'm sorry to interrupt Joanna while you were taking a breath. But it's part of the question rack too, but it's just not as defined the way I'm gonna ask. But so how come, because what you're saying now makes so much sense, but how come so many companies say they do this, but then somehow they don't? It's just words on a paper or on a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Maybe
Joanna wants to answer. Go ahead, Joe.
Actually, I think that the problem is they don't have your Venn diagram, Helge. And I'm not saying that is the only way to go. But one thing that actually came up again at the awards when they had the awards for Best CX Strategy, and this came from Anouk Vastet from the Netherlands, who's worked with, I think she's also worked in the pharmaceuticals. She said that this year's nominations, it was clear to see that they were showing that they actually had a framework to work out of. And the problem is, I think that companies quite simply do not have a framework for customer experience. The frameworks that they use don't have to be exactly like, they don't have to be Helge's, or they don't have to be mine, but you need some kind of framework to succeed at working company-wide with customer experience, is my take on that. I don't know if you want to add anything, Helge.
Yeah, so one of the reasons, so the CX story inside of the pharmaceutical company is not a rosy story. Like I present the part of it that's mine, which I think did some amazing work, but it was really, really hard. And one of the biggest difficulties we had was governance, because the experts that knew what CX was all about, they did not get access to being able to set that governance. So the governance either didn't exist, which it didn't do for many years, or it was set by someone who they know just enough to be dangerous, I don't know if you've heard that term, which means that they know how to use all these terms, but they have no idea what they mean. Other people who don't know what they mean either think this person is using all the right terms. They certainly must know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I found that the more important CX became in the organization, the more people just took the term and used it to describe something completely different. And that was, you need governance for that. And we kind of, that was, I did not expect that would happen. And we got kind of, I don't know, caught in the bed. I don't know if this is a Norwegian term that makes sense, but maybe not that much.
Yeah.
I think it works.
Taken by surprise, really.
Yeah.
Yes, right?
That's a good one. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And surprise for Norwegian for surprise is bad. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but I think you're right. And yeah, a lot of companies have been caught by surprise by and just the effort it takes as well, right? No, we can hire one CX manager and everything is going to be solved. Yeah, right. Okay, good luck with that.
Yeah.
But talking about who is responsible for customer experience, who is responsible for customer experience in your company?
So yeah, in my old company, actually it came from the very, very top. Like this is I think it's $100 billion company, and the CEO, which is in the US, of course, we're 70,000 people, 70,000 people in 150 countries, and the CEO, Rob Davis, eventually said, CX, that's how we are going to win. He didn't say it like with those exact words, but it was kind of a huge mandate was given to CX. And I think, that's helpful if it comes from the very top, or if there's some kind of isolated division that operates on it. It can kind of come from inside a silo as well. But I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, Joanna. The customer is something everyone has in common. But a normal organization is designed so that everyone is competing. And so they don't really want to work together. And if you come and say, well, there's a customer framework here, everyone should work to get that done, and you have one single human being that spends his life running around in meetings, trying desperately to tie all these things, that's never going to happen. So it can come, like mandate should come from the top, but you should make sure you're investing in a group that's big enough to actually be able to kind of wield this kind of flow that needs to happen between these silos, which are competing and just trying to do as much of a land grab as possible using the customer.
Can I just add, reflecting back on Helge's talk on the customer network as well, what they did, right, when it was bad times and they had this opportunity to invest in something and they chose the customer, they put their money on the front line, right? So the frontline workers, and it wasn't just about hiring people to be frontline people, but they also empowered them with the mandate and the decision-making ability on behalf of the customers. Now, also Gjensidige is an insurance company where the customers own the company, so it's right. And I think the power of enabling, and John Sills talks about this, a lot of people talk about, empowering your frontline workers with the ability to make decisions when there's no real routine or mandate or process to describe the situation. And John Sills says, when that happens, just be human and it's all going to be okay, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of Gjensidige's success back then as well, that you are able to do the right thing. You are able to, help the customer get their job done or understand the value that we can create for them. Maybe it's a little bit off of what we normally would do in this situation, right? But we keep hearing about these examples. And I think in my own organization as well, I think we seriously need to step up our game when it comes to investing in the frontline people, because there's so much magic going on there, and that's going to spread back and up if we allow it.
You can see the same. I'm going to go back to the pharmaceutical industry, but historically, the pharmaceutical industry is a bunch of salespeople running around the country talking to physicians about what drugs are available and what's the scientific research behind it and what's the kind of the trials that are proven its success. And there's a good reason for that, because back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was no internet. And so these people operated as kind of the idea was human email, but that's not what happened. Like these people build relationships with these physicians. And sometimes when you ask the sales rep, like when you get the opportunity to talk to them, you say, what's the most important thing you need to know when you meet a sales rep? And they would say, I need to know the names of their children and when they graduate and which courses they graduate from. And then even sometimes they just meet with me because their day is really stressful and they just need a 10-minute break. And I'm just there to give them that break. Now, what happens when the pharmaceutical industry digitizes their sales rep? They forget all about that. And they only focus on the email part. They think the job is to send content into the email inboxes of physicians.
Yeah.
And it's hard to understand how much that has failed.
Yeah.
And that's across like the entire industry. But they show up to these conferences still and talk about omnichannel and CX and personalization. But if you look at like the people part of it, like sales reps meeting physicians, that experience is completely different from the one. But I remember 10, 15 years ago, in one of these master classes I talked about back in 2010, I met the guy from Tesco, like the convenience store chain in.
Yeah. I started my work career in Tesco.
And he said, do you know we have people inside of people's kitchens? Because they were home delivery. Yeah. And do you know how we recruit these people? Do they have a criminal record and a driver's license? And he thought that was the worst thing. Like we have people who could do research every day inside of thousands of kitchens across the UK, and we don't even pick people that are trained to do good questioning or good insights collection or anti-bias. And we could see that from the sales force that we were working with as well. The frontline staff is like if you just train them just a little bit, like teach them how to not be biased, or teach them how to ask a good question, or how to report a good answer or good insights. Yeah. Massive value to the organization.
Yeah. And I think this is also part of the data source. And I know Helen Rigamonti talks a lot about this as well, that actually asking your employees to understand the customers, because the frontline employees, the salespeople who are out there, they're talking with the customers, they get to know the customers, they can bring so much insight back that we can act upon.
And I think when a frontline worker, either it's a sales rep or a customer service agent, or technical support or whatever it is, when they sort of make noise about a change that they don't want to happen, management should listen. It's just you may not be able to hear them out or do what they want 100%, but you should definitely listen to what they have to say, because that's where your value is created. I think back to the Venn diagram, that's going to be pure value for you to put in that sweet spot.
I have this reflection. So I came across this quote from MIT, and it says that people make the best decisions they can based on the information in front of them. And then I'm looking at the pharmaceutical industry. It's really hard to do market research in the pharmaceutical industry because of compliance. Like nobody's allowed to talk directly to a patient. Like you have to hire a third-party research agency to do that. You're sometimes allowed to talk to a physician, but it's also really hard depending on the market. So if you look at these marketers, and I worked with a lot of marketers that I found to be very, very product-centric. And I'm thinking that not because they have to, not because they want to, but every day, this information is the product information. And then over there, like a little bit, this is a very small window. So it's like the channel information. And then all the way, like in the back of my room, that's the customer data for insights. So of course you're going to make decisions about the product because it's closest to you. So how do you get this customer information closer to people? We shouldn't expect that they're going to magically become more customer-centric if the information that hits them every day is products. So I used to work as a strategist in Scandinavian Design Group, and I found that when I did bad strategy, creative was always bad. But when I did good strategy, there was like a little bit of a chance that the creative was good. And so I tried to ask the question, like, what leads to good strategy? And I found it's the information. If you get bad information, you're going to get bad strategy. If you get good information, good strategy. So I'm thinking, like, focusing on the strategy itself is kind of maybe the wrong place to look. Look at the insights, look at the tools we use, the models we use, the methods we use to get to those insights. If you can change that, I think you're much more likely to get to good strategy as well.
Awesome. Absolutely. I'm going to bring us back on track with the next question, although I think this conversation has been really, really interesting. The next question is, what is capturing your attention the most in today's customer-centric business world?
Good one, Joanna. I love it.
So 2 things. One is the data, because like half a year ago or a year ago, there was like AI algorithms, LLMs. It was all about these black boxes, like these algorithms that we can't understand how they're making decisions. But lately, more like the last maybe 4 months or 3 months, I'm seeing this increased focus on data quality. So we will never understand how these machines work. They don't even know that themselves. But they are like a huge part of the reason they're doing good work is because we feed them with good quality data. And I've seen what happens when you feed it with channel and product data and pretend that it's about customers. You don't get any good answers. So that's one thing that I'm really kind of looking at now or focused on now is this thick data that you mentioned, Merete.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part is these transformations, because it is insane that the failure rate of a transformation is 88%, and we're still going at it in the same way with the technology first. So I'm thinking at one point, some companies have to sit down and say, hang on a minute, maybe we're doing it wrong. Why isn't this working? And then somebody would say, well, no employee really wants it. Well, how do you make the employees want it? Or no customer really asked for it. Like, what are the customers asking for then? So I think those like the thick data and I call it customer transformations. I'm hoping the world focuses on that.
Yeah.
I hope you're right.
I was just preparing a LinkedIn post. I've started doing these sort of not punchlines on LinkedIn, but just as a little. It's basically a little project of mine. But I try to put like really, really short sort of ideas or thoughts or reflections around a topic that regards to CX. And one of them is about how to utilize your CRM people or departments. Like they need to be talking about not the stuff that you want to tell them as a company, but you need to understand what it is that your customers want to hear about, because otherwise your CRM initiatives are going to fail. And I think it's basically what you described. Like, hang on a minute, like you say, what should we try and turn this around and see what happens if we have the human approach to this and not the machine approach?
The way that so the first thing we did back in 2019, 2020 was we gave the marketers. So this is a pharmaceutical industry massively run by marketing. Like there's marketing, market access, medical, like 3 huge departments. But marketers, there's like 5,000 marketers in Merck across 140 markets. And so we started giving them this tool to understand the customer, which was the customer need. So it's a jobs to be done approach, which we kind of fit to be able to fit inside. Now, what happens when they suddenly understand that I can ask a simple, different question and suddenly the world changes? So suddenly they start asking this very simple, different question. And then they're saying, hang on a minute, to answer this question, I need new data. And then now with new data, because I don't have it, like we literally saw that. And now I want to, like, my job is not to talk about my products, but it's to kind of try to figure out to serve one of those Venn diagram needs. And so the channels that you're giving me aren't really going to do that, because the channels I'm using, they're just articles. You're just giving me channels to publish content. Like I want to have interactions and experiences, and I want to go outside the internet. And then suddenly they needed a language to describe, because what they're doing, they're creating content, putting it into a box on the internet, and then go on to the next production content. And so we need to give them a language to describe what happens when this content or this experience creates value in the interaction with the customer. Then they said, I need to measure this in a new way. So we said it's like giving them this first kind of seed was like putting a Ferrari engine into an old Fiat. Suddenly, like the engine is good, like it really works, but the rest of the car just keeps breaking down, like nothing works around. Suddenly you change that core question. And that's when we started trying to figure out, like, what are these other things that also needs to be changed?
The underlying and overlying.
Yes, and that's when you look at the operations, like the incentive structure, how we measure, what data we use, what channels we use, technologies we use, how we work together as an organization or inside of teams. All of this kind of was kind of looking at how all of these things needed to change. That's your transformation. It started with this little seed, like this little question: what does the customer need compared to what do you want to say about product USPs? I mean,
so inspiring. I see, and I know by coincidence, because we tried to record this episode once before, but we didn't make it. So, and today I was a little late. So, but I see that we are approaching your hard stop, Helge. So I'm aware of that. But I do want to ask you one and maybe two final questions if we have the time, depending on how much you have to say about the next one. So the first one is, and it sort of touches a little bit upon what you just talked about, and the question is about voice of the customer management or voice of the customer programs. What are your take on those? Easy one, right?
Yeah. So I think they talk a good game. So I'm looking at several of these voice of the customer. So when I learned what voice of the customer was back like 10, 15 years ago, these are deep, insightful researches into customer motivation and language and situation and like really deep stuff. And then I think the technology industry needed to sell more things. And they figured out that this was a language that they could use because it sounds really good to people who don't know what like thick customer insights is. So I think the intention is good. I think maybe in 5 or 10 years, we might get to a sophistication in the collection of that data that makes it the voice of the customer. But at the moment, I'm not like, I know you have to start somewhere, but I think it's skinny, like super skinny. And I think it's oversold. And I think that removes investments in things that would have more impact or be more valuable.
Is it though, just to challenge it a little bit, is it because it's not used right, or is it because the nature of the voice of the customer program itself?
No, I think we're collecting like skinny data. Like I think we're collecting data. So since 2016, I've been talking about terrible term. We talked about digital design thinking because we were saying design thinking has a lot of good stuff in it, but it's a ceremony. It doesn't scale. It's super expensive. It takes too much. So how could you take those good things from design thinking, getting closer to the human, and put it into a digital environment so you can kind of do these things at scale? It's not hard. You just ask different questions. And I think like the voice of the customer program, these platforms, they are there to make that happen. But I'm just like from my own personal experience and this like limited amount of companies I've seen since I was inside of one, the questions we're getting this machine to ask and the data we're collecting, that's not what you promised us. But maybe that's just changing the layer, like ask better questions because the machine is there to collect the data, but the machine needs us to know what those good questions look like.
Yeah. Now is a good time for us to mention that we are sponsored by our Voice of the Customer program vendor. So that's the reason why I didn't know. But I think you're right. And also, lucky for us, we are sponsored by one of the ones that are actually developing and actually looking at ways to collect and also process the data and turn it into real insights and not just sort of checking the boxes or yes or no. And you can, I think, if I don't remember wrong, you can also tweak and make as much as you want with the questions, basically. But it is still a survey-based solution, right? But like you say, people have to start somewhere, and we are proud and honored to have Navigate as our sponsor. But I also think it's fine and it's fair to reflect upon, are they here to stay? Should they be replaced with different technologies? And not at least, are we actually collecting the right type of data? So
yeah.
So
and I think another very, very short perspective on that as well is that there is a difference between surveys and having listening posts. And listening posts, if managed well, can resemble the salespeople out there catching the conversations. But it needs to be managed well in order to pull the insights from that.
Yeah, and you need to be able to combine data as well, right? You can't just use the voice of the customer or the customer replies. You also have to
mix it in with thick data and also, the contextual data?
I think the answer is kind of in front of, like there, so that close. So
look at the camera again, anybody watching.
Sorry, some of these might be just listening. This is true.
Listening, yeah.
So the so in pharma marketing, like one of the reasons a physician would spend time with anything a pharmaceutical company produces is to learn something. Like my market research, that's not a surprise, and market research confirmed that. So if you are there to try to produce any value to your physicians, like you should make sure that they learned something. Now, do they ask that question? No, they don't ask that question. They ask an NPS question. Would you like to promote? And inside of many indications in the pharmaceutical industry, that question is proved to not have any correlation with future business value at all. So many teams just change the question, which is fine. But my point was that if you are in a learning experience, like on Coursera or Udemy or anywhere, it's a mix. It's a mix of content and then interactions and questions and back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this content that our company was outputting, and it's like, it's just an article, and then you have some kind of thumbs up, thumbs down at the bottom. Why don't you, midway through the article, ask a question about the content? And so that reinforces the learning for the physician herself. It also helps us check the box. Did they learn something or didn't they learn anything?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a bit like we have the mechanics, but we just have to kind of make better experiences. So one of the things that came out of the strategy work that we did, like just before I left, was to say we need to change the experience principles in our organization, because we need to make sure that learning is a key part of every experience that we produce. So you shouldn't be able to make anything unless you also ask the question, what do I need as a marketer to learn from my customer as a part of this experience? Yeah. And then just design it in there. Then we start talking.
Yeah. Joanna, I'll give you the final question, and I know which one it's going to be.
Okay, do you? Okay.
Yeah.
Finally, were you the one, Helge? You have been the one who's trying to secure funding from top management for customer-centric improvement initiatives. What is the first thing you would do, or what is the first thing you can recommend to our listeners to do?
So securing funding, asking top management for funding for CX. So we found that when we were able to produce that Venn diagram and demonstrate that link, and kind of, you have to not look at the world through the lens of the customer. My experience, don't look at the world through the lens of the customer when you're talking to business people. Look at the world through their lens. And then that one, for us, that one diagram was really helpful, because it demonstrated to them kind of that there's not a charity component here, it's a business component. And then, like, we spent a lot of time, like, there's so many closed doors, so we had to figure out which door is just a little bit open.
Yeah.
There's this story from when I was working in Scandinavian Design Group. There was a packaging for some kind of Wi-Fi router, and they were redesigning the packaging, and they were asking this product owner, can we put just a little bit of a sticker or something on that box just to kind of highlight this thing? And he said, no, because as soon as I open that door just a little bit, 100 crazy people are going to come running through that open door. And so we were always looking for these small openings in the organization, like the customer need.
Yeah.
As soon as he found that, we just, like, 100 people, crazy people, came running through the door and tried to open it up. But again, I think that the advice I'm getting as well, and that I use, is when you're talking to these financial people or business people, like, they are your customers. So don't bring your customer to them, but think through their lens, think through their language.
What is their job to be done, right?
Yes, exactly. And how could you give them success?
Yeah, and we're back to, it's not about what I want to tell them, it's about what they need to hear, right? And want to hear.
We are as exposed to becoming process-centric as CXers as our rest of the company is as becoming product-centric.
Yeah.
And I do really feel that there's just so much process-centricness in CX at the moment, and we should kind of take our own medicine maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that was a really great final
last famous
sentence to finish with.
Yeah. It was. We should take a little bit more of our own medicine, and it's a good advice. And I've actually started taking some of it because I had a wake-up call a few episodes back as well. And I know for sure that some people in my organization are going to be looking at the Venn diagram anytime soon. So thank you for that. If people want to read more about you, Helge, we will share, and from you, we will share a link to your LinkedIn profile on the show notes. And also, I suppose LinkedIn is the best place to reach you if anybody wants to reach out and talk more or hear more about your journey. And yeah, so assuming that we use LinkedIn quite a lot, don't we? So once again, you have been listening to the CX Pod. It's been a great episode full of energy. We didn't make it through half of the questions this time, but still we managed to make a episode full of golden nuggets, as Joanna likes to refer to them as. Thank you so much, Helge. Thank you, Joanna. And to all of you out there, have a great day ahead. Thank you for listening to the CX Pod. If you want to reach us, you can always find us on LinkedIn, and please remember to follow us on Spotify and leave a review of what you think.